yourself slowly, and the most tragic part is that you don't even see it happening. Every single time you bite your tongue when you should speak up, every moment you sacrifice your evening to help someone who wouldn't do the same for you, every instance you swallow your frustration with a fake smile because you're terrified of seeming difficult. You're not being kind or generous. You're committing a slow, deliberate act of self-destruction. Neville, you've convinced yourself that this is who you are, the reliable one, the giver, the person everyone can count on. Maybe you even feel a twisted sense of pride in being indispensable. But I need you to hear something that might shatter the comfortable lie you've been telling yourself. This isn't nobility. This is cowardice disguised as virtue. You scan every room you enter like a radar system, immediately calculating the emotional temperature, predicting what people want to hear, molding yourself into whatever shape will earn you the least resistance. It's become so automatic that you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. Your authentic self has been buried so deep under layers of people-pleasing that you've forgotten it even exists. The cruelest irony? The very behavior you think makes people respect you is actually teaching them to disrespect you. When you consistently show others that your time has no value, that your opinions don't matter, that your boundaries don't exist, you're training them to treat you exactly that way. You're writing the script for your own mistreatment. Carl Jung understood this psychological prison better than most. He called it identification with the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world. The persona itself isn't the problem. We all need social masks to function in society. The catastrophe begins when you forget that the mask isn't you, when you become so fused with this pleasing, accommodating character that you lose all connection to your authentic self. Or here's what's really happening beneath the surface, in the depths of your unconscious mind. Every time you betray yourself to avoid disappointing someone else, you're feeding a psychological pattern that grows stronger and more demanding. You're not just being nice. You're running from something much darker and more uncomfortable. You're avoiding the terrifying possibility of confronting who you really are when you're not performing for others. This compulsive need to please isn't random. It didn't appear out of nowhere. Somewhere in your history, probably very early, you learned a devastating lesson. Love comes with conditions. You discovered that your authentic feelings, your anger, your needs, your frustrations, were unwelcome. You learned that acceptance required you to edit yourself, to present a sanitized version that wouldn't disturb anyone's peace. Perhaps you were the child who learned that expressing anger meant losing love. Maybe you grew up in an environment where conflict was so terrifying that you developed supernatural abilities to prevent it, becoming a master at reading micro-expressions and deflecting tension before it could arise. Or maybe you simply modeled yourself after someone who lived this way, absorbing their patterns without ever questioning whether they were serving you. What started as a survival mechanism in childhood has become a psychological prison in adulthood. You've become so skilled at anticipating what others want that you've lost the ability to know what you want. You've become so afraid of disappointment, yours or theirs, that you've chosen the guarantee of your own slow suffocation instead. Every social interaction becomes a performance. Every conversation requires you to calculate and calibrate. Every relationship exists on the foundation of what you can provide rather than who you are. Your nervous system lives in a constant state of hypervigilance, always scanning for signs of disapproval, always ready to adjust and accommodate. You tell yourself you're being selfless, but the truth is more complex and more painful. This pattern of self-sacrifice often masks a deep unconscious selfishness, the desperate need to be seen as good, as valuable, as worthy of love. You're not giving freely. You're making transactions. You're trading pieces of your soul for moments of approval, and the exchange rate is destroying you. The persona you've built, this helpful, accommodating, never difficult version of yourself, has become so convincing that even you believe it's real. But Jung knew that the more rigidly we identify with our persona, the more we distance ourselves from our true self, the self that has needs, boundaries, preferences, the self that sometimes gets angry, sometimes says no, sometimes prioritizes its own well-being. And buried beneath this persona lies your shadow, all the parts of yourself you've learned to reject and repress, your legitimate anger at being taken advantage of, your desire to prioritize your own needs sometimes, your frustration with people who demand without giving, your exhaustion from carrying everyone else's emotional weight. All of these natural human responses have been pushed into the darkness because they don't fit the image you've created. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger, more influential, more destructive. It leaks out in passive, aggressive comments, in sudden emotional explosions, in mysterious illnesses and chronic fatigue. It manifests as depression, anxiety, a sense of emptiness that no amount of others' approval can fill. The cycle perpetuates itself in the most insidious way. Every time you choose the path of least resistance, every time you avoid setting a boundary to prevent discomfort, you reinforce the neural pathways of self-abandonment. You literally train your brain to choose others' comfort over your own authenticity. And the more you do this, the harder it becomes to break free. People around you begin to expect this version of you. They become accustomed to your availability, your flexibility, your willingness to absorb their problems without reciprocation. When you occasionally try to assert yourself, they react with surprise, disappointment, even anger. They've become invested in your self-sacrifice because it serves them, and they'll resist your attempts to change. This is where the psychological trap reveals its true cruelty. You've not only trained yourself to self-abandon, you've trained your entire social environment to expect it. Breaking free doesn't just require internal change. It requires you to disappoint people, to shatter expectations, to risk relationships that were built on your willingness to disappear. The fear of this confrontation keeps you trapped. It's easier to maintain the familiar prison than to face the terror of authentic existence. It's safer to keep being who others want you to be than to discover who you actually are. Because what if, underneath all the pleasing and accommodating, you find someone who's angry, someone who has needs, someone who's been hurt and disappointed and is tired of pretending everything is fine? But this is exactly the confrontation that must happen if you want to reclaim your life. The path to genuine self-respect requires you to stop seeking respect from others and start giving it to yourself. It demands that you value your time, energy, and peace of mind as much as you value everyone else's. It insists that you treat your needs as legitimate and your boundaries as non-negotiable. The journey from people-pleasing to self-respect isn't just about changing behavior. It's about fundamental transformation of your relationship with yourself and the world. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't determined by how useful you are to others, how accommodating you can be, or how little space you take up. Your worth is inherent, unconditional, and doesn't require anyone else's approval to be valid. The transformation from chronic people-pleaser to self-respecting individual requires you to face the most uncomfortable truth of all. You've been living someone else's life. Every choice filtered through the question, what will others think? Every decision postponed because it might cause inconvenience. Every dream deferred because pursuing it might seem selfish. You've been so busy being who others need you to be that you've never discovered who you actually are. This realization can be devastating. It means acknowledging that years, maybe decades of your life have been spent in service to an illusion, the belief that your value comes from external validation. It means recognizing that the relationships you've built, the identity you crafted, the entire structure of your existence has been constructed on the foundation of self-betrayal. But this devastation is also the doorway to liberation, because once you see the prison, you can begin to plan your escape. Once you recognize the patterns, you can start to interrupt them. Once you understand that your people-pleasing is actually a form of manipulation, an attempt to control how others see you, you can begin to let go of that exhausting control. Jung's concept of individuation becomes crucial here. Individuation isn't about becoming selfish or uncaring, it's about becoming whole. It's about integrating all aspects of yourself, the light and the shadow, the giving and the receiving, the accommodation and the assertion. It's about developing the courage to exist authentically, even when that authenticity makes others uncomfortable. The shadow work begins with radical honesty. You must be willing to acknowledge the parts of yourself you've been denying. Yes, you have anger, legitimate, righteous anger at being taken advantage of. Yes, you have selfish desires, the natural human need to prioritize your own well-being sometimes. Yes, you have limits, boundaries that, when crossed, cause you pain and resentment. These aren't character flaws to be ashamed of. They're human realities to be integrated. The person who never gets angry isn't enlightened. They're repressed. The person who never has selfish moments isn't saint. They're disconnected from their own needs. The person who never sets boundaries isn't loving. They're enabling dysfunction. But acknowledging these shadow aspects brings up the emotions you've spent your life avoiding. Guilt floods in when you consider prioritizing yourself. Shame whispers that you're bad for having needs. Fear screams that asserting boundaries will lead to abandonment. These emotions feel overwhelming because you've never learned to navigate them consciously. The key insight that Jung offers is this: these uncomfortable emotions aren't your enemy. They're information. They're signals from your psyche telling you that something important is happening. The guilt you feel when setting boundaries isn't proof that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're doing something different. The fear that arises when you consider disappointing someone isn't a stop sign. It's a signal that you're approaching something that matters. Learning to sit with these emotions without immediately rushing to eliminate them is perhaps the most crucial skill in breaking free from people-pleasing patterns. You must develop the capacity to feel guilt without being controlled by it, to experience fear without being paralyzed by it, to notice shame without being defined by it. This emotional resilience doesn't develop overnight. It requires practice, patience, and often support from others who understand the journey. You must literally rewire your nervous system's response to conflict, disappointment, and disapproval. You must teach your body that these experiences, while uncomfortable, are not life-threatening. The practical work begins with small acts of authentic self-expression. Instead of automatically saying yes to every request, you pause. You give yourself time to check in with your actual availability, your actual desires, your actual capacity. You practice phrases like, "let me think about it," and "that doesn't work for me," until they become as automatic as your old accommodating responses used to be. You begin to notice the difference between requests and demands, between healthy relationships and parasitic ones. You start to see how some people in your life have become accustomed to your unlimited availability and react poorly when you begin to have limits. This reaction is information. It shows you who is invested in your self-sacrifice and who genuinely cares about your well-being. The relationships that survive your transition to authenticity are the ones worth keeping. These are the people who respect your boundaries, who appreciate your honesty, who love you for who you are rather than what you do for them. The relationships that don't survive, the ones that required your self-abandonment to function, needed to end anyway. This process of relationship evaluation can be painful. You may discover that some people you thought were friends were actually just beneficiaries of your compulsive giving. You may realize that certain family dynamics only worked because you were willing to absorb dysfunction without protest. You may find that some professional relationships were built on your willingness to work beyond reasonable limits. But as these unhealthy connections fall away, space opens for authentic relationships to develop. When you stop performing and start being, you attract people who value authenticity. When you stop giving from depletion and start giving from choice, Your generosity becomes meaningful rather than compulsive. When you stop accommodating dysfunction and start modeling healthy boundaries, you inspire others to do the same. The energy that was once scattered across dozens of demanding relationships becomes available for fewer, deeper connections. The time that was once consumed by other people's emergencies becomes available for your own growth and interests. The mental space that was once occupied by calculating others' reactions becomes available for creativity, reflection, and genuine self-care. You begin to discover preferences you didn't know you had, interests you'd forgotten, dreams you'd abandoned. Without the constant noise of others' expectations, you can finally hear your own inner voice. Without the perpetual performance of being who others need, you can explore who you actually are. This isn't about becoming uncaring or selfish. It's about becoming selective with your care and strategic with your generosity. It's about giving from overflow rather than depletion, from choice rather than compulsion, from love rather than fear. It's about recognizing that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's the prerequisite for taking care of anyone else authentically. The respect you seek from others begins with the respect you give yourself. When you treat your time as valuable, others learn to value it. When you enforce your boundaries consistently, others learn to respect them. When you speak your truth with kindness but firmness, others learn to trust your authenticity. This transformation ripples outward in ways you might not expect. Your children, if you have them, learn what healthy boundaries look like. Your colleagues discover what professional respect means. Your friends experience what reciprocal relationships feel like. You become a model for authentic living in a world full of performance and pretense. The journey from people-pleasing to self-respect isn't easy, and it's never completely finished. There will be moments when old patterns resurface, when the temptation to accommodate returns, when the fear of disappointing others feels overwhelming. But each time you choose authenticity over accommodation, each time you honor your needs alongside others, each time you speak your truth despite the potential for discomfort, you strengthen your authentic self. You discover that the respect you always sought was never about being perfect or accommodating or endlessly available. It was about being real, being whole, being courageously yourself in a world that profits from your self-abandonment. The people who truly matter will respect this authenticity. The people who don't weren't worth pleasing anyway. Your life becomes your own again. Your choices reflect your values rather than others' expectation. Your relationships become mutual rather than one-sided. Your energy flows toward what genuinely matters to you, rather than being scattered across others' demands. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. The person you become when you stop pleasing everyone else is someone worth respecting, someone worth knowing, someone worth being. And once you taste that authenticity, you'll never want to go back to the prison of perpetual accommodation. The freedom is too sweet, the peace too profound, the life too genuinely yours to ever trade away again.